Welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes Ministries. Thank you for listening. Janet will be talking about her struggle with addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, unwanted same-sex attraction, and living a homosexual life. Janet has survived all those things by the grace of God. Janet's not a doctor, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychotherapist, she's not a licensed counselor. Janet is an ordained pastor and wants to show you God's promises, how God has set her free, and how you can be set free. What He has done for her, He will do it for you. If healing and freedom are what you want, you have come to the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Here is Janet Boynes.
I am so excited about this interview, even though I say that all the time, but I really am excited about this interview because of your book, TJ and Mary Gilroy. Thank you for being on Healing and Made Free.
We are happy to be here.
Absolutely.
Really
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes.
It's an honor. You know, how I found out about you is that Mary was so kind to send me a book that you both written, Father Fracture.
Yep.
And when I opened up page 6, it says, this is going to be a touchy subject. This father fracture is the number one reason that people don't know who they really are.
Yeah.
Before I get you to answer that question, tell me a little bit about the both of you, two-part question, and what made you decide to write this book?
Okay, so Mary and I were both military officers. We were in San Diego. Mary was a naval officer and I was a Marine. And we decided to get out of the military and for basically for a variety of reasons. Anyway, after we left San Diego, we ended up in the Chicagoland area. And we had sort of a crisis of faith, so to speak. And yeah, it was like a blow up with World War III at home. So we ended up leaving the Catholic Church and ended up in a phenomenal church in the Chicagoland area, which is where we heard the subject of father fracture. In fact, the pastor there invited Andrew Womack in a few times, and that's where we learned of him. And it was through Andrew Womack's ministry that we learned of you and your awesome ministry. So that's the kind of connection there.
Andrew is a great friend, him and Jamie.
He's awesome.
I'm honored to have them in my life.
Yep. Great ministry. So anyway, when we were sitting in church one day at this church in the Chicagoland area, in fact, the pastor's major theme for his ministry was basically the love of the Father and how much God loves you. So it was a fantastic foundation for any Christian. In one of his sermons, he titled it Father Fracture. And he was talking about how if you had a bad relationship with your dad or no relationship at all, how that would affect your loving God or receiving the love of God in your life. Well, in the middle of his sermon, he made this one statement. He said, you get your identity from your father. And I'll tell you what, that was a light bulb that went off in my head for a variety of reasons, which I'll come back to in a second. So I had a light bulb, but I looked over at Mary.
I was in shock.
Well, it was like, I had a light bulb, she had fireworks. Yeah. So I'll let Mary talk about what the fireworks are about, because that kind of helps to explain some of where we're going on this and why her input on the book was so critical.
I grew up with a father fracture as wide as the ocean, and I had no idea that that's what I had. But that day in church, I mean, you got to understand, I was saved. I was baptized in the Holy Spirit. I mean, I was going to heaven. We served in that church. If you're looking for a good church in Chicago, check out Life Changers because it's awesome. I mean, we were prayer ministers there, all those kinds of things. But I always felt like something, and I couldn't have put my finger on it, was just not quite the way it was supposed to be. You know, like when you watch a person turn into a transformer and all the pieces just fall perfectly into place. I just felt like a couple of my pieces were out of alignment. And sitting there that morning at church, when the pastor said a child gets its identity from their father, I mean, it was like a bomb went off, and in literally the biblical blink of an eye, I had complete clarity about some of the things that I had done, because I have a very black checkered moral past. And even though I'm saved, those things somehow still kind of got in my way. And when I heard the pastor, you get your identity from your father, that all that fog was gone. And I had clarity like I had never seen. And it changed my life in a big way. Mm-hmm. And so that message has always stayed with me. And then a couple of years ago, TJ has written some other books, which are really good. And Father Fracture is a part of those books. And someone we know said, hey, could you just like put a little handout together or something that I could share with people on Father Fracture? So TJ's the author. I'm definitely not. But he wrote the book Father Fracture, and I read it and I said, hey, pal, I think I can make a contribution here. And then I put notes in it because I lived a Father Fracture and I know what it looks like in people. I know what it feels like to have one. And so when we were done, we had this little book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it's amazing. I'm not going to lie. I did not get a chance to read all of it, but I did skim through it. There's certain things I will mention. Timing it's horrible. I'm too busy. But what you just said, a child gets his identity from your dad. Mm-hmm. I believe that. And that's why it's so important that young boys have a relationship with their father. And when they don't have that relationship with their dad, they're going to go and look for it from somewhere else. And so I think that's really important. You just talked about why you wrote the book. What is a father fracture? What is a father fracture?
Okay, so a father fracture is when you have or had a bad or no relationship with your father. And that can manifest itself in a whole bunch of different ways. And just to tag on to what you just said about, the point of you get your identity from your dad. Okay, so my dad was awesome. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, he wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. My dad was a World War II Marine, so he had his issues like any other dad would, but I never had a doubt if my father loved me. He provided for us, all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have that big of an issue with it. And I didn't realize how much of an issue Mary was dealing with until, the pastor said this, and it's like our world blew up. But for me, Janet, it confirmed something because after we left the military, for those of you who've not been in the military, if you join the military, they provide a purpose for you.
Yeah, true.
Okay. When we left, that purpose was gone. And I was searching like a maniac to try to figure out why God put me on the planet. And I couldn't come up with answers. So that became my mission. Well, part of that mission was, I couldn't get answers. And here's what I found. That when you're looking for purpose, you're looking for the wrong thing. What you should be looking for is the gift that you have. But you can't find your gift if you don't know who you are. So if your identity is off, you're not going to find your gift and you're not going to find your purpose. So then I found out as we're going through this, and as this pastor illuminated it for us, that the biggest reason people don't know who they are is because of this issue called father fracture. Okay. That's how I stumbled across it. And to me, it was an answer for a piece of the puzzle, which is why, if you look on the book, the subtitle is How Your Relationship with Your Father Affects Your Identity. So to me, from my take on this whole subject, which was different from the pastor's, was this subject is the key ingredient for people to figure out why they don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. And if you want to fulfill God's purpose for your life, that's the starting point.
Yeah. So and it's hard for people to know who they are when they didn't really have the foundation of mother and father to sow into them to help them have a better understanding of who they are. If you are like type of parent that said, don't do as I do as I say do.
Right.
And you can't talk back. You just don't know who you are. You don't have a voice. I didn't have a voice in my house. My mom would be like, shut up. You don't get to say anything. So Mary, when we talk about a father fracture, how different was your father from TJ's dad? I mean, TJ said, he had a perfect life. I'm just kidding. No, but he had a great father.
In terms of dad, he did really good though.
What was it like for you growing up with a father?
I'll tell you, both of our dads were World War II veterans. So they're kind of from that generation that smoked like they were on fire and drank like they were trying to put it out. So my dad he was very successful. He was very prominent local attorney, but he drank a lot. And he fought some of his own demons. And my parents separated my dad died when I was 15. They separated about a year before that. But even when he was living in our house, he just wasn't part of the family. I mean, in the book, one of the things I say is I never realized that a family did things with two parents until I went to college. I was clueless. I mean, he didn't join us for meals. If we went to church, he stayed in the back. I'm sure he loved me. He never told me that he loved me. And when I started going off the rails, he was still alive and he didn't correct me. And that probably would have saved me about a decade of bad decisions, bad relationships, bad choices. And so, I wasn't physically abused or emotionally abused or anything like that. There was just this gap. And I thought about this the other day as we were talking about being able to chat with you. And I remember when my mom came to me and said, hey, look, your dad's probably only going to live another 24 hours. Do you want to go see him? And I said, no. I mean, there was just not enough relationship there to even want to go see one of your parents when they were dying. And, that's a father fracture. That's a biggie.
And the father fracture, when you really talk about that, Mary, considering, you came from that type of background, how were you able to have an understanding? Because I think you look for a man like your father in so many different ways, at least us women, so they say, and men normally look for women like their moms. So how did you find such a great guy?
Well, let's
I'm trying to help you, TJ.
Take a bow, TJ. Let's talk about the hand of God, okay? I mean, that must be what it was.
Thanks, Janet. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll hear about that for the next 3 weeks. But I will tell you this. I dated guys. I mean, I just got myself into a mess, and we certainly won't go into that here. But I mean, I was a mess, and I remember I just dated all the wrong guys. And then one day I said to myself, I think the next guy who comes along and is just nice to me, I might marry. And you'll never guess who it was, right? It was TJ. But I will tell you that I watched him very carefully. My dad had been a drinker, and I'd seen the results of that. And I had been involved in that, and I didn't like it. And so the first time we were kind of out socially, a bunch of us, it wasn't just us. The first thing I watched was what TJ drank, how many he had, and what was he like after he had them. And I thought, oh, he passes. He's only had a beer and a half in 3 hours. Okay, he's qualified. But I really think it must have been God, because I had messed it up so many times that I was about to throw in the towel. I was like, forget this. I'm not looking for a guy. It's not worth the trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is pretty awesome. Those of you that are listening, please share this with friends and family members or your kids that have been through things with their father. I think it's so important. This book is called Father Fracture, and TJ and Mary wrote the book. I want to read something out of Father Fracture on page 4. It says, in your formative years, your father is supposed to be your source of protection, your source of provision, and your source of trust. I had none of that.
Yep.
I didn't trust my dad because I was raised in a family of 7 kids, 4 different fathers. So my mother's husband raped me. The man that raised me, I didn't trust him because he beat my mom on a regular basis. He was an alcoholic. As far as provision, he drank mostly all the money that he should have been bringing home. So I had none of that. So for me to go out and look for a man like my father, that's probably why I didn't get married and I went into a homosexual life, because I looked at men as abusive in so many different ways. So my question is, you write that what a father is supposed to be. How can this help other people in their father fracture?
That is a fantastic question. Okay, so in my military experience, one of the things that people always say is, what does right look like? So I was talking to a friend of mine who was he was a pastor as well. And we were talking about personality and stuff, because I was learning a lot about personality and strengths and stuff like that. So we got through that, and it just occurred to me, I asked him, well, tell me about your dad. So he goes on to say how I had a great relationship with my father. And I went, something was amiss from what he was saying and what I observed as reality. And so I go, so your dad loved you. He hugged you. He told you much. He appreciated you and that kind of stuff. He goes, oh, no, I didn't have that kind of relationship with my father. Now, I didn't say this, but I was sure thinking it. Well, just what kind of relationship do you think you're supposed to have with your father? So, Janet, to your point, you're more normal in the world than we are, because most people have never had a father that they could trust with anything.
Yeah.
So, right now, the statistics are that 50% of children will grow up in a single parent home at some point in their life before they reach the age of 18. And over 40% of children being born today are to never married parents.
Scary.
Okay, that messes with you. So how are you supposed to know if you've never had a dad who is your source of protection, your source of your food, your eating, and all that kind of stuff, where you're wondering where your next meal is coming from, and whom you can't trust? And then you go to church and the pastor says, hey, God the Father is somebody you can trust completely. It doesn't compute. You've never seen that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge issue. And so to answer your question, you can't fix something you don't even know is broken. And most people are walking around the planet having no idea what a healthy relationship with a father is supposed to look like. It's in Scripture. But we have to, but most people won't, they gloss over that if they had a really terrible relationship with their dad. So for a lot of people, father is a bad word. And what we have to realize is father's not a bad word when you really understand how it's supposed to be. So I think we, and this is part of our mission, and it's certainly Mary's mission, is to get people to realize that dad's not a bad word, that he's supposed to provide those things for you. And just because your father blew it doesn't mean your father in heaven does.
Right. That's exactly right.
So,
but
they won't go there if they don't even know this issue exists. And most people, they don't know what father fracture means until we start talking about it. And then they go, oh, no kidding, I've got one of them.
We taught father fracture. It's been a couple years ago at a church up near Raleigh. And I'll never forget, we were taking a break and this younger woman came up to me in the bathroom and she was pretty emotional. And we just kind of talked about father fracture. That wasn't the primary focus of the teaching, but it was certainly part of it. And she looked at me and she was tearful and she said, I get it now. She said, I have kids and I see this in them and I just didn't understand it. She was divorced. Her husband had remarried and basically had another family. And so her children were exhibiting the signs of a father fracture. And she didn't know what it was. And she looked at me and she said, this is a release for me. At least now I know what the real challenge is. Because so often I have this thing about getting to the very root of a problem. I'm like that in health. And that's just how I'm wired. And so when people talk about symptoms of violence, promiscuity, gender issues, this, that, I understand all that, but very few people understand the root. And I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt, the root is father fracture.
Yeah.
You couldn't talk me out of that if we spent the next 10 years talking. There's no way.
I think in so many ways you are correct, because when I think about a father, I sort of compare God and my natural father, being raised in a family of 7 kids, 4 different fathers. You see, I had an internal declaration that I would never marry a man, like my father. I won't have kids out of wedlock because I have more half brothers and sisters than the man on the moon, and I will never marry a man if they were abusive because I would kill them. And so here at the age of 65, I'm still single. You wonder why I have so many issues. And so when you are looking for a spouse, TJ, when a woman is looking for that husband, all we have as an example is the man that raised us.
Yep.
And you're right, unless you get to the root cause of, why you continuously pick the wrong man all the time, is because you're picking what you saw growing up, because that's all we know.
Yep.
Yeah.
How do we fix that?
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think one of the things, and it says this in Psalm 78 about a father's responsibility, and I'll paraphrase it a little bit, but fathers are to teach their children to set their hope in God, to set their confidence in God. Mm-hmm. So if you grow up without a dad or a bad dad or an absent father, however you say it, I think the very best thing we can do is encourage young women and young men too, to find a good church, a Bible teaching church, so that when they decide to look for a spouse, they're not going to do it the world's way. The world's messed up. I mean, the world is so messed up. And I know that, when TJ and I got married, oh my gosh, we were so crazy about each other. We were inseparable. It was we kind of made people sort of like, could you guys get over it? No, we were just crazy about each other. But even in that relationship early on, before I really began to understand the love of the Father, and we were in a good Bible teaching church, I set my hope in TJ, and that's okay. But when you're setting your hope, in someone besides God, eventually you're going to be disappointed. And that's what I see a lot of young women do today. They set their hope in some guy thinking he's going to fix all the problems. They've made a bad choice. And then they're on a merry-go-round, and they won't know how to get off unless they meet the love of Father God. And then things will change.
Yes and no. I agree with what you say, partly because there's so many people that are broken and have been through a lot. I mean, think about it. I was raped, watched my father abuse my mother growing up, beat her up, knock her down steps. Why would I want to go into a relationship? And I think that's what I have to compare a man to. That's all I have. So you have to get to the root cause as well, and get the counseling that you need so you can become whole through the power of Jesus Christ. And everybody doesn't have that mindset because they have so much anger in the man or the woman that raised them. We're talking about fathers, so I'll stick with that. But a lot of people I know, even as adults, have so much anger. I don't have any more anger towards the man that raped me, my mother's husband, even though there was 4 men in our lives. So I still think that there's so much brokenness that people have to get to the root cause, which you talked about earlier, of why they are going through what they're going through and why they hate their father so much, or the men that they're dealing with. And that's why a lot of women go into homosexuality, is because of the abuse. 90% of women that are living a homosexual life were abused by a man. So TJ, I don't even remember the question I asked you a while ago. Sorry.
I do.
Okay, good.
You asked, basically the question was, if you're looking for a spouse in this particular case, how do you fix this issue? All right. So that's why I wrote the book. Because the purpose of the book is really to help you to figure out what your identity is. So until you understand who you are, you can't fix anything. And most of us have a broken concept of who we actually are. And in a lot of cases, our dads are the ones that are to blame for that. But the point is not to blame your father. The book is not about how to grow better dads. I mean, there are ministries who do that, and they're awesome. That's not what we're about. The point of this was for you to figure out who you are and why do you have this anger? Why do you have these things going on in your life? Well, if you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix it. So the more I've talked to people, okay, so for instance, when we were at Life Changers in the Chicagoland area, who
was the pastor?
Greg Dickow.
Okay, I see that. I used to watch him on TV quite a bit. I like him. I really like him.
Awesome ministry. So when people would come up after church and ask for prayer, I mean, it got to the point where Mary and I would ask them before they even open their mouth, tell us about your dad. And I would tell you, Janet, no kidding, probably 80% of the time or more, they would just break into tears right there. So whatever their issue was, this was the root cause of it. So if they don't know that, they're working on the wrong problems. And that's what I see more and more people doing is they're working on all the wrong issues, and they don't even want to go there when we talk about this, because for most people, I mean, you're a brave lady to even talk about your past. Most people, that's a scab that's grown over, and, you know, it's like we're little guys pulling the scab off to get to the point where you actually get to heal the wound. Well, most people don't want to go there until you bring it up, and then they realize how it's affected their life and they want to get their life right. Well, you've got to address this issue. And I think once you get to the point where you're willing to address the issue, and now you start listening to somebody who's preaching the love of God the Father. I mean, there's a reason why Jesus referred to him as Father in Abba, which eludes a lot of people because of the love that your Father is supposed to have for you. When you begin to understand, oh, I've been missing this my whole life, you don't even know you're missing it.
Right.
So when you begin to realize there's something there that you've never experienced before, the desire starts to percolate up out of you, and the Holy Spirit helps to bring that to fruition. So you actually start looking for it. And there's only one source. I mean, all our dads, even my dad, they're imperfect. And Jesus is pointing us to the guy who is the perfect father. Well, this helps to illuminate the fact that he is a perfect father, and that's what you're supposed to be looking for. So if you're looking for a spouse, if your identity isn't right first, your foundation's off. You're not going to look for the right person. You're going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So that's why I think this is it's really about identity, who you really are. And personally, I think that's kind of the gist of what we're getting at here. Because I mean, I think most people want to figure out what they're on the planet to do, but you're not going to do that until you figure this part out.
You know, we talk about fathers, which I think is very important. Those of you that are listening, please share this. I'm talking with TJ and Mary Gilroy. Father fracture, how your relationship with your father affects your identity. The sad thing about what we're talking about as far as fathers, a lot of time you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
exactly.
And a lot of times fathers and mothers were raised in such a way that they didn't have fathers, so they raised their children the same way they were raised until they go out and get some inner healing, so they don't make the same mistakes that their fathers made. I'm not sure, you know, how many children you guys have, but in writing this book, TJ, how did this book, how did raising your children help you to write this book?
Well, okay, we've not been able to have children.
Okay.
So, I mean, we looked into
You can adopt me then.
Oh, well, okay. We actually looked into adopting several times, and, you know, for whatever reason, it just never was right. So we just took it to the point where the Lord's got us here for a reason, and we're moving along to do what he has to say. But, you know, Janet, you just said something. In fact, I noticed this on your website. It says, we believe that when you know better, you do better.
That's my favorite saying.
I know. It's awesome. It's awesome. So it's funny. One of my favorite quotes is actually from Mark Twain, who is definitely not the pillar of Christianity. But he said, it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Right. That's good.
So a lot of people think they know a whole lot more than they do. And one of the things that father fracture does is it takes you back to go, oh, I didn't even know I was missing this because I was going along on false assumptions. You know, so, you know, God bless moms who are raising kids, but that's not God's best. So, and that's one of the issues that when we bring this up, you know, a lot of times moms will get offended until they listen to the whole message. And then they begin to realize, look, we're not criticizing you. We're not criticizing dads. We're not doing any of that. That's not the point. The point is, take this as you as an individual. Forget your children. Forget your parents. Just you yourself. It's you and God. How does this issue affect you personally? That's the message.
And I like that too. And Mary, I was thinking about a question that you guys gave me, but I'm going to ask it a little differently. Um, how does father fracture affect women?
I think pretty clearly, women are promiscuous. I mean, if I had a hashtag at that time in my life, it would have been hashtag promiscuous because it was really bad. Their moral ground is just very shaky. Promiscuity is one. And I think today with the bombardment of the LBGT and stuff like that, I also think that it makes women more susceptible to lesbian relationships, and because they're trying to protect themselves. It's too hard. I mean, when I read your book, I thought to myself, yeah, I get it. You've got a statement in there, a sentence in there somewhere that says most of us knew we weren't really lesbians. And I thought, I know that's true because when I talk to young women, I work at a medical fitness center. On the days I work, I see hundreds of people every day. And sometimes God will just prompt me to just start talking to a young woman, and we'll find out enough, and I'll give her a book because, whether she's saved or not, when people start, for whatever reason, when people start to read the book, they find themselves. And if you can understand how you were raised is affecting your identity, I believe you can start to deal with it and start to heal it. And so I would say promiscuity, relationship after relationship. And today I would say you can get pulled into the LGBT.
Thank you for that. TJ, when I just had a woman on today that sold herself in pornography. And a lot of that came from looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for a community to fit in. And your wife just talked about homosexuality, but many women give themselves away because of what they didn't get from their father. And so they're just saying, love me, love me, love me. So they wind up, just having sex with all these men, feeling like they're going to love me when it's, for them, it's just about sex. For them, they're searching and they're looking for something. Am I off base with that?
You're right on the money. And, again, because my mom and dad were wacko in some respects that, actually my parents are now abnormal compared to what's considered normal today. But so backstory, I was teaching this stuff to a law enforcement group in the southeast region of the United States. And the story was really on purpose and leadership and stuff like that. But I was dealing with this issue, and I made the statement that you get your identity from your father. Well, the talk was going great. These guys are not bashful, right? So, there were ladies in there too, but they were all chiefs of police and stuff like this. Until I said you get your identity from your father. Oh my goodness. The atmosphere in the room changed like that. It was just a whole different deal. And then I just talked briefly about it. I didn't have any statistics or anything to back me up. It was just, I just kind of knew it intuitively. Well, afterwards, these guys came up to me and said, hey, we know that what you just said is true, but we're cops. So we're naturally distrusting. Do you have any evidence? Okay, so I went on a search for evidence, and I found a book by a guy named David Blankenhorn called Fatherless America that was written in 1995. Awesome book. No spiritual stuff in this at all, though. So it's mostly just facts. One of the most astounding facts that he brought out throughout this book is the way that fatherlessness. Now, again, father fracture doesn't just mean you were fatherless. It could be you had a dad at home who wasn't there for you. You had to bend over backwards to try to please him. There's a lot of issues besides not having a dad. Having a dad who ignores you is in some ways just as bad, if you can believe it or not. But anyway, one of the things that David Blankenhorn brought up was that the way this shows up in men is anger, uncontrollable anger. Okay, I didn't know that. And then he said the number one way it shows up in women is promiscuity. Well, that floored me too. I went, you got to be kidding. I didn't understand it until I started reading through some stuff and then started really digging into this. So those two issues are off the charts today. And so if you, and then loneliness, depression, all of these things are symptoms whose cause is father fracture. So there's like a bunch of indicators I put in the book, and then like what's the root cause of things like the depression and suicide issues we're having today. Honestly, the root cause is father fracture, but most people don't want to go there. One guy who does is Larry Elder. If you ever listen to any of his podcasts, he's all over this subject, and it's like it's a taboo subject in a lot of cases, but he's all over this. But and
the Black homes, it's something that they don't want to hear. Just like they don't want to hear about homosexuality as well. But it's most definitely a needed topic, because a lot of people in the Black community, and I'm sure in the Caucasian, I can only speak for our community, many fathers are incarcerated. They're not around. To raise their boys. And so they're all joining gangs, and they're in this group and that group because they're looking for a place to fit in. They're looking for identity. And so that's really hard. And when you talk about fathers in the line that God, father, wife, kids, everything else follows thereafter. We were never taught that in the Black community. Women were the head of the home. We made all the decisions on, who goes left, who goes right, do this, do that. But if you weren't taught these things, it's really difficult to have an understanding of why God created man first. We know there was a fall, and we know what Eve fed Adam and him and his dumb self. He really messed up, by taking the lead from a woman when God created him first. And then we wonder why women are so controlling at times and, trying to take over the role that, God has given men, is because we need more fathers to step up. And I talk about that when I travel. Guys, we need you to, one, be the head of your home. We need you to look after your wife and your children. We need you to take your place, where God has placed you. But if, you can tell them that to your blue in the face, but many of them are so broken, they don't know how to take their place.
Okay, so to that point, Janet, I went to a men's conference that Andrew Womack did a couple of years ago, which was phenomenal. And what blew me away was there were 1,500 guys at this thing. You would think they were all pretty strong Christians, and they probably were. The brokenness in that room was palpable. It was just like, I was shocked how broken these good, loving Christian men were. Well, if they're broken, what's that say about the rest of the world? So it's a humongous issue. And no matter where you bring it up, just ask somebody, hey, tell me about your dad, and just be quiet and listen to what they say. It will blow you away.
Mary, when we talk about husbands or fathers, what I noticed for Janet Boynes Ministries, all the moms are willing to be a part of a group to build a community to get the help that they need for their child that's living a homosexual life. But whenever we're trying to do the same for men, they don't want to do it. They don't want to step up and say, they say, you go get all the help, you go get all the information, bring it back to me. But the men don't want to get involved. Why do you think that is, that men just don't want to get involved like women do? I know we're wired differently, but when they had that child, it took two, not one.
That's right. They were both home the same night. That's exactly right. What I think is that
that was funny.
Yeah, right.
I just caught that.
Yeah, right.
I was trying not to laugh.
It's true, I think a lot of dads today feel inadequate. Who trained them? Who taught them how to be a dad? Who instilled in them the things about provision and trust and confidence and those kinds of things? And I think because guys have more ego involved, women find it very easy to group together and to kind of spill their guts, so to speak. Guys aren't like that. And so I think it doesn't surprise me that the guys don't want to get involved, because they don't want to look like they failed. That's their ego. I mean, that's ego. I mean, God gives us that. And so I think when I talk to guys, and I talk to guys about father fracture, I'll talk to anybody about father fracture, but I know for them, it's more of a solo journey in the beginning. They've got to understand what their issues are, so they can work on their own identity. And then suddenly, as they begin to feel more whole, it's a whole lot easier to say, hey, my children are struggling in this area. Now I know that I need to step up as the dad, and I can help them fix their identity. This issue of father fracture probably, I mean, we're raising our 4th generation of children in abandonment. I mean, if you read that David Blankenhorn book, it's written almost 30 years ago. And when he traces the, quote, dismemberment of fatherhood in America, I burst into tears probably 5 or 6 times reading that book, because I'm thinking to myself, this guy wrote this in 1995. I'm almost 30 years down the road, and it has gotten that much worse. Yep. So when you start to try and unravel the issue, I mean, you gotta get back as far as you can, you know, the grandpa, the dad, the child, because for the last 50 years or so, we've basically tried to say that fathers aren't important, and that simply isn't true. And here's the thing too. I mean, the Bible says a wife can win her husband through her example, right? So even if all the girls get together and they begin to understand father fracture, and they set that example, then you can, you know, throw your confidence in the word that wife can help change her husband by, you know, showing him that she's fixed her identity. And then, you know, maybe he picks up the book and he reads it and he goes, oh, she's got a good point there. I need to get in the game on this. But in answer to your question, I think a lot of guys don't want to be embarrassed. They already think they're failing. And if you have kids who are off the rails and you're the dad, you know there's a challenge. And I think a lot of guys take that as failing. They condemn themselves, and they don't want to put themselves in a position where they're going to look like they're weak and they're not the head of their house.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty good. Let me just jump in here. TJ, many people that are listening to this podcast will say, you wrote a book, Father Fracture, how your relationship with your father affects your identity. And they can say, well, look, how are you going to teach us? You were never a father. How do you respond to that?
That's a good question.
Because it's not about being a father. It's how your father affected you. So this is not about making better dads. That's not the point. In fact, right in the introduction, I go into there's all kinds of assaults on men today. One of them is, dads are not what they're supposed to be. I agree with that. That there's an assault. In fact, there's a whole left-leaning initiative to say that men aren't necessary in a home, period. I mean, honestly, there's a whole movement of that. That couldn't be further from the truth. And those are really awesome things to go after and go fix. That's not what this message is about. This is all about you and your dad, not you being the father, not trying to be a better father. So if you're a dad with teenage kids, or you're an adult baby boomer or something like that with adult kids and stuff like that, this is not about trying to go back and fix what you screwed up. This is about you figuring out who you are, because you can't do anything until you get that straight. You really can't understand how much God the Father loves you until you realize how much He loves you. And that's the foundation. So it's your point is one of the things that I think a lot of people want to go after. So when I do presentations, that's one of the first things that I tackle with folks. It's a fantastic question, but my mission is not to try to make better fathers, because I'm not an example of that. I can't go there.
Good point.
But what I can do is talk to you about, hey, you're not doing the things you know you're supposed to do with your life, and this is the reason why.
I think more conversations like this within the church with fathers, and you could be a leader of something like this for fractured dads, because so many women that I know that are living a homosexual life, even if they come out of that lifestyle, not for myself. I like to get married. I just can't find the right guy. And every time I go out on a date, they want to have sex outside of marriage. And first thing that comes to my brain is when I was raped. So it's really difficult for us women to look for something look for a man that's going to look after us and take care of us and adore us. And because when I go into a marriage, I want to honor my husband and respect him. But how can you respect somebody who wants to take advantage of you, before your time, or say he's a Christian when he wants to have sex outside of marriage, or when you see our children being raped and killed by all these men out there that are, killing our kids and raping our kids, and the very people that should be protecting them are not protecting them. And
That's right.
I find it difficult for us women to put our dependency in our husband, even though the Bible says your faith doesn't rely on the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. We know our faith relies in God. As I said earlier in the podcast, it's so hard for me to trust God, even because I didn't have a good father, figure. And I struggle with that even at the age of 65.
I do too. No, the trust thing is huge.
Yeah. Well, let me just give you the flip side of that, because guys struggle with this just as much as women do. So most guys today are so insecure, it's crazy. They don't think they do anything right. Nothing. They don't do right at work. They don't get any accolades at work. They don't do right at home. Nothing they can do is right. So all of this falls on their shoulders. And then they're told, you're supposed to be responsible not just for you, but for your wife and your kids. You're supposed to be responsible for what you do at your job. So all this responsibility, which we used to carry like it wasn't a burden.
Yep.
Okay. Now it's become overwhelming and oppressive. Okay. How did that happen?
Father fractures.
Right.
Yeah. So this guy's dad didn't teach him how to carry those burdens. So we go to scripture and Jesus says, I'll take my yoke upon you, and basically he'll share the burden with us, and he wipes away all this stuff. We're not taught that's literal. That's not just some nice church talk. We're not taught that. So guys don't. So part of the issue you're talking about, guys having an issue with women, guys have an issue with God. I mean, look at the number of men versus women with butts in the pews of churches. It's almost always a heavy female component as compared to the number of guys there, and that's the problem. So
yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, and we're coming to an end here. I know we were all made on purpose for a purpose.
Yep.
And here on the back of your book, it says almost everyone has a father fracture to some degree, and affects our image, our ability to discover our gift and purpose. And it is the major reason why so few people ever make the difference for which they were created. Respond to that.
That's the whole reason I wrote the book, because quite frankly, my quest was to help more people figure out why God put them on the planet. Why are you here? Because your fulfillment and your joy come from being in the center of his will for your life. Well, if you don't know who you are, you're never going to figure that out, because you're going to keep having missteps along the way. So you'll go down one track and you'll think this is it, and you figure out, oh no, that's not it. You won't find the right relationship with a spouse because you're put together to make that purpose happen. So that's part of the whole issue. I mean, there's a variety of other things. And probably one of the best books I've ever read on purpose was by a guy named Miles Monroe. Incredible guy. I was so devastated when I found out he died, because I was going to go to the Bahamas and sit under his tutelage and figure some stuff out.
And a plane crash.
Oh, I know. So just an incredible person. And he probably has done a much better job of talking about purpose and defining it from anybody I've ever read. but nowhere in his writings does he say how to find your purpose. So I think for me, the biggest thing that I've always been looking for is, why don't people even look for it? It's because their identity is so messed up that they can't even go there. So this is the foundation of everything, in my opinion. And I think Mary would agree with me on this. Without this, you will not learn to trust and have your confidence in God, which means you won't have any trust and confidence in anyone or anything else. So until you get this right, and again, right really means you got to figure out what the problem is, so you can't fix what you don't know. Then you start to see how much the Father really, no kidding, loves you, and all the pieces fall into place when that happens.
Yeah, I think the more... Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I think the more I can get people to read this book and to at least understand that maybe there's a foundation, a root there that they've never considered, as that goes on. I mean, it's taken me years, but the further you go down that path, the more you know that God created you unique, special, gifted, one of a kind, and you begin to trust his design for you. And when you begin to trust that, things in your life that have plagued you forever, they just kind of fall off. And I can't explain it any better than that. But things that used to bug me and plague me, and I was a performer, boy, I'd do anything for approval. The more I allowed God to love me, and I started to just trust that, I just became the person, or at least got on the path of becoming the person that he really intends for me to be. And that's a life changer.
Well, this has been a great podcast. Those of you that are listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes, please share this with someone who is really going through things with their fathers, sons. If you're dealing with things with your dads, if you're dealing with things with your sons and your fathers, this book is a book that you want to read. Also, TJ, how can someone get this book if they want to read it?
We made it real simple for folks. We have a website called fatherfracture.com, and you can get the book on there. There's also a really good video of a session we did at a church in Salem, Oregon. So they were fortunately they videoed the thing, and so there's a bit more detail than what we talked about today. And just a little plug here. This is a skinny book.
It's not a big read.
So it's only 62 pages, and we did that on purpose because a lot of people today don't like to read. So this isn't going to weigh you down or take forever to get through and that kind of stuff. So anyway, you can go to the website. If you have questions or comments, I would love hearing from people. Please contact us. That's the best way to do it.
Is your email address on that site as well? Can you tell us what your email address where people can reach you?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is going to be at TJ at, well, what's the easiest email for people to use? Well, you can just put the contact information in there, or our business name, which is this falls under, it's TJ at TMG-ASSOC for associates.com. So it's TJ at TMG-ASSOC.com.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you, Mary, so much for being on Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Love having you.
Thanks a bunch. It was awesome. Thank you.
It was a privilege for us.
Thank you for listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Acts 10:34 says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't play favorites, which means what he has done for Janet, what he has done for guests on this show, he will do for you too. If you are struggling with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. They will do their best to help you any way they can. Go to the website, janetboynesministries.com. Janet loves you, and most importantly, God loves you. Have a blessed day.